Mr. Giles, are you ready?
Hey, Giles.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. All right, so yeah. I'm just trying to get myself ready because me and Giles, people have no idea what we're creating at this point. In our community, we know that most entities don't have skin in the game when it comes to talking about African American issues. People like to write about black people, but don't like to talk to us and find out really what pertains to us.
Say so.
So, Mr. Giles, in all his glory, said, you know what? It's time for a change. If the city of Charlottesville is truly going to be inclusive, Cville tomorrow is willing to take that first step. And partnershiping with us on different ideas and things that matter in the city is what we're going to take on.
Nice. I can appreciate that. Because Giles, you are no stranger here to our airwaves. So appreciate what you do. Appreciate the community outreach that you have already started with. Hopefully, listeners in our community can see those efforts, and we can continue to grow our community, and particularly the media, right? Whether we're talking about print, whether we're talking about broadcast, we have to own it. When I say we, the collective community, the honest voices that represent us, and that's one thing I love about Cville tomorrow.
And a huge part of that, Giles, before you go on, because I know where he's going to come in on this one, is that when him and I sat down and discussed, we realized that a lot of the way that the media presents the African American, brown, and black community is, let's say for instance, okay, Giles and I go out somewhere and rob a store. 40-year-old Caucasian male robbed such and such and such. When they come to me, thug from such and such, you know what I'm saying? They give you all these adjectives to try to tear down the person that I am before we even get to the crime that comes. So that way, the magnitude of how I'm judged is totally different. We talked about these things. We talked about, okay, when we talk about black issues, that doesn't necessarily always mean not housing, food stamps. Black issues don't always mean
it's not
black.
always negative.
Yeah, it's not always not having something. But the way that the media has presented itself is that African American issues are poverty issues. Or when we talk about something, let's say zoning. It's not that African Americans don't care about zoning. It's just that we're not at that point yet. We're renting. We don't have home ownership under a large scale where we can care about the zoning for the easement between two properties and so forth. So what we're planning on doing is talking about doing different segments about things that we care about in the city of Charlottesville. Giles?
Nice.
Yeah, well, thank you, Razor, and just to all of you for being willing to kind of reach your hand out and say, yeah, we're willing to partner with a nonprofit like ours that frankly struggles to reach black audiences, and I think also struggles to deal with the issues affecting African American communities around Charlottesville, Albemarle, Central Virginia, because there's a lot of blindness built into what local media is and has become. And I think we know, I think we're starting to feel like in many other issues and systems and setups in our community, we're starting to recognize those blindnesses and understand that essentially, segregation never ended in many of our communities. And in the news community, we know this to be the case. And as the news and journalistic local newspaper environment and economy has collapsed, and national companies have integrated and scaled back and cut newsrooms at a time when the demand to be more present, to be, where there are more local issues that are pressing, that are more communities with their own voices and their own roles in these conversations, more different high stakes money decisions controlled by local government and local systems on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. We're still a little bit stuck identifying and describing the problems. And we are, I think, slow to start to build the coalitions, conversations, trusts, and partnership to build, shared truth. Because if you're going to solve any issue, and, for the main people involved in the issue, don't agree on what the truth is and don't trust each other. Like, let's just say, I mean, you're like selling your computer, right? Or like your car to your mother-in-law. I mean, it's like any basic thing like that. If you don't agree to what the shared framework for truth is, and then you don't build trust that you can transact across that and come to agreement around priorities and a way forward, you're going to fail. Okay, so as a news organization, Charlottesville Tomorrow we just realized that what we were pre-August 2017, we could not be afterwards. You know, you can't be a sort of privileged information source serving the people in the privileged information economy. But as a nonprofit newsroom, we're tiny, we're under-resourced, we don't cover even half of the things we should cover. And frankly, there's this other thing about what people think of as newspaper type news, and the voice and process and outcome that produces is one that essentially leaves a lot of audiences and communities out, right? It's like and so we've been in this searching and journey process to be better, to be a public service newsroom that serves the whole community and that brings focus, attention, and clarity to the main public service systems that affect your daily lives, whoever you are. So that's local government, but it's also, services, water, electricity, transportation. Right. Mm-hmm. But it's also the nonprofit systems that say that they're acting in your interest and in your name. It's social entrepreneurship that says it's supposed to benefit everyone. I mean, how do you ground truth that it is benefiting everyone? And how does the community decide who's doing well and who's not doing well? And does the money go here, or here? Because that's basically what local government and local control are about.
Right. Yeah.
It's how you cut up the pie, what strategies you have to grow the pie, and how transparent you can make those processes play out.
And Giles, one of the things that I really like, though, I think we have in common is sort of the purpose and the methodology that we use to get our content out, meaning that we realize that it has to be packaged in a way and presented in a way that's going to be receptible, right? And so like I wanted some of your insight on that, because again, I think you've been doing a great job, and the team, shout out to Elliot as well, chief editor, but as far as making it sexy, right? Because that's what it's about.
I mean, reporters default to nerdball. That's just that's
facts.
That's just how it is. And I think that if you want to think about Charlottesville Tomorrow's highest use case in terms of taking, nonprofit money in the community to run a nonprofit newsroom, the highest use case for us is paying for the reporters, because that's like the sort of legally actionable flow of public information. Okay, so that's like the leverage, but getting that to the audiences who can use it, I mean, that's part of the purpose. Like if you don't get it to the people who can use it, it doesn't do anything.
Giles, if I can interject for a second, Charles, when Giles and I sat down and talked, and I asked him, I'm being transparent here for a second, like, how are the people that have the money that say they want to help the African American community, how are you reaching them? Right. And there's a disconnect there. He touched on it when he said, for one, the two sides don't really trust each other. Right. That has to be said. That has to be placed on the table so that we know how to go to the next step. Number two, if you're if you say, okay, we're going to give every African American in low income housing $10 million, but you send it through a Google Media blast on people who don't really have computers, that use their cell phones as their computers, and it comes across as spam, you're not going to reach them. If you use words that, not saying anything about education part, but I am. If you use words that go over top the head of the person, like you're trying to impress other reporters while you're writing, instead of reaching the people that you are, you're going to lose them. These are things that we're going to work on. So on our part, that means that we have to get over ourselves and say, well, they ain't gonna do nothing anyhow, because you're gonna start seeing advertising at Cville tomorrow that's talking about issues that really pertain to you. Like, what do I look for when I'm trying to rent in this housing market that we're talking about? What the powers that be are talking about affordable housing doesn't apply to me at this point. I gotta find out where I can rent at. My credit is not good, So what do I do so I can find places that my children are safe? These are the type of stories we're going to be writing about and doing segments on.
And I mean, I think I really rely on, this I'm saying, the power of partnership. If we got these reporters, they're going to go get the questions answered, right? But who's going to ask the questions?
Right.
And that's part of their job too, but there's a lot of blindness built into that, especially if it's a small, team that, and especially if you look at the sort of kind of history of unconscious bias and the audiences that are privileged and preferenced in these type of news conversations, it tends to be, who's buying the bulk of your advertising, or who are your subscription holders, or who are the quote decision makers, or thought leaders. Like, all those things can play into unconscious bias. It makes people sort of presume they know who to go to get the questions answered, or even to ask the right questions. And I think if you're in this moment now where you got all the systems talking about how can we better serve African American communities, and yet not listening, not having a two-way flow of information, and then not speaking to the elephant in the room, which you guys pointed out, which is there's 20 great reasons for black audiences not to trust the newspaper or the mainstream white radio station or X, Y, and Z. There are many, many good reasons not to trust. And then you're in a moment when you're in a you're talking about big systemic change that could have 50-year impacts, whether it's on rezoning the entire city in the next year, which is apparently about to happen, whether it's redeveloping your public housing stock for the next 50 years, which is underway, whether it's also access to capital, reforming your criminal justice system. All these things are like the wheels on the bus are going around. So are you on the bus, driving the bus, or are you watching the bus? And that's kind of the thing I think should be a wake-up call for everyone, every audience. And I think you guys, I think, have a really great feel from taking things that might be nerdy or might be very specific and pulling them all the way out. In fact, I thought I was coming on the show today to talk about Kobe, the Super Bowl, and Juice WRLD.
Well, hey, Juice WRLD too. Giles, that's what we do, though. We bring flavor to any situation that we don't do. Thank you.
Yeah. So Giles, I mean, thank you. I think that was a great intro for anybody that don't know. Now you know, right? But so how about we take a quick break and then we come back, and I know Aaron has some good conversation, good topic for you as well for us to further the discussion. All right, so y'all, we are joined by Giles Morris of Cville Tomorrow. Aaron, Charles, Razor, stick with us, y'all. IMHO. Hit us during the break. Any questions or comments about what you heard thus far or what you would like to hear? 434-422-9101, IMHO Talk Show Online. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in. Joining us yet another Sunday. This is Black History Month. We got a big show. And right now we are still joined by the head of Cville Tomorrow, Mr. Giles Norris, and we're going to kick it over to Ron to further this discussion about us owning and representing us, we the people.
Yeah, I think we were having appreciate that, y'all. I think we were having a really good conversation offline, and I was basically just being creators and owning our content and just being out there with the internet. I mean, it's changed things, and I guess it's just interesting when we're talking about news. People think I'm weird, but my major news outlets that I listen to are like BBC, Al Jazeera, and NPR. And when I told somebody they should go to NPR and get their news, they're like, NPR, I've never heard of that, which is very weird to me because they're like, I listen to CNN and Fox.
Right.
And I'm like, you do? I'm like, who still does that?
Hey, so right after that, did they call you a communist?
I don't even know what they call me. I don't even know what they call me, but I think the thing is that, what I was explaining is that when I listen to Al Jazeera, or even when I watch it on YouTube, I see somebody that looks like Giles, somebody that looks like me. I see a Muslim sister. I see an African, I see Ethiopian. I see all these people, which is what the world kind of looks like. And it immediately begins to make me question what I'm seeing on a daily basis here in this country on every other major news outlet. And my question to Giles is, when he started talking about who's reporting the information, how can even we forget about a global scale, but get on a lower scale, what can we do as creators to help change what's being communicated, but more importantly, how it's being reported? Yeah,
I mean, there's so much in what you are laying out, and I feel like there's, I I think there's to me there's like almost like 3 basic ingredients and we could talk for 3 hours about each of them.
Right.
One of them is essentially the digital media revolution and what it's done to legacy news organizations and also to communities' ability to share, process, and contextualize information on their own.
Right.
So that's a kind of cultural revolution we are all in the middle of as it's unfolding.
Right. It's happening like literally right in front of us, even when we're in it.
Right. So then the second thing is, and it's not unrelated, is essentially the globalization of the race conversation and the response of media to that, both response and lack of response, both to that, right? But and then the third thing I would say is the economics of news.
How so? What do you mean?
Well, I mean the digital revolution just took your ad base out from you. So legacy media organizations have just been hemorrhaging money for the last 15 years. So at a time when the demand is the highest, where the speed is the most, where the access is almost universal, the businesses themselves have been failing, shrinking, and losing. You can bring up Al Jazeera. They are a factor in all 3 of these, right?
Right.
So they are state-owned media financed by like essentially Middle Eastern oil interests. So they don't care if they're making a profit on their advertising. So they're going to fund a media organization the best way they can. It's like owning a British soccer team. You're not making money on that if you're spending $400 million a year to win the league, but you're enjoying it, and it's doing the thing that you wanted it to do.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Which is challenge American bias.
Exactly. Right.
I mean, frankly. So and then globalization of race and media. Al Jazeera knows that they have a global product. It should look like the people who are going to consume the global product. They are very intentional about who is bringing you the news and what it looks like, because their product is going to be in Singapore and Hong Kong and in the Middle East and in London and Paris and in San Diego and Boston and Mexico City, right? So and then the last piece is as the failure of local news models and frankly of American regional media companies has allowed them into our market and as a main player. And then if you're a cord cutter, put it on top of that, it's one of the more powerful kind of networks in the entire media universe. So you're asking all the right questions, you're identifying all the right things. I mean, I hope we switch to Juice WRLD before you ask the answers.
Yeah, we might as well just play the track right now.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Giles, but in all that you and Aaron were talking about, how does the local everyday person interject themselves? What power do they have to change that?
Well, so I mean, there's two again, it's like everyone is also now an international and national news consumer, right? So most people are more tuned into things that are happening all over the world and nationally than they are to what's going on locally, in part because those media entities compete harder to get in your headset than the local companies do. And then what they provide is way better and more entertaining and more fun and more representative of who you are. So there's a lot of incentives not to pay attention to local things. At the same time, the reporting of news, falls on, a group of 8 to 12 people from day to day in Charlottesville, like literally. And everyone else is chopping and cutting and sharing off of that.
Yeah.
And those people are, in general, young, new to their jobs, and new to town, right? So just from that, like, you can start to imagine where all the pitfalls and pathologies are. Add on that, like, the historic race conversation in Charlottesville, the relationship of the sort of like traditional black and white interests in Charlottesville, how that has played out in news dynamics, in newspaper dynamics. I mean, why was there a black paper and a white paper? How could you even get away with calling a paper a white paper? Right. I mean, that's the South. That's news in the South, right? Because who was, I mean, when you were integrating the schools, what were you reporting? And that's not old here, right? That's just right over our shoulder here. And we know that with every issue. But when you get, a town, this is the other thing we have to just say out loud whenever I feel like this gets lost in so many conversations. It's so obvious. Probably doesn't get lost in your conversations here. This is a boom town. This town is exploding. People are making money all over this town. This town is, people are moving from around the country to be here for the lifestyle of this town. Like, irrespective of what they've been seeing in the news cycle around race and hashtag Charlottesville.
Yeah. I thought Giles was going to say irregardless.
Right.
Irregardless.
How kind of sweet the nectar is in this little college town right by Richmond and DC with all this startup money flowing through it and X, Y, and Z, So if you aren't conscious of that, then you're playing like, you're playing a theoretical game on theoretical terrain. So when we're talking about, do you care about the affordable housing problem in Charlottesville? Everybody says yes. Everyone says yes.
Right.
What does that mean? What does it mean for you?
Right.
And then from there, can you connect that to the policy conversations that people are having? Because and I mean, that's just basic. If we did that, if we brought 15 people in a room and we asked them that, we would open up so much news terrain that is not being touched right now.
Right.
Yeah. And Giles, you know what else? Because you mentioned the global market, the world, stage on how competitive, the media is now. And so sometimes that makes folks want to get the first story, the early story. Like we even noticed, in the Kobe Bryant tragedy, there's a petition now to actually disband TMZ's show because people felt like that their whole thing was so disrespectful, regardless of what side you're on, but the petition is about feeling TMZ is disrespectful to, families, people's privacy, accuracy of information, just to get the story out first.
Right.
And I
think that's wrong though, Charles. Yeah. Like, honestly, like, let's say Kobe Bean Bryant was the cab driver off of 5th Street Extended, and he lost his life because of a drunk driver coming down the other side, and the news said that there was an accident, this person passed away. Nobody would be coming to arms talking about disband this news media. You know what I'm saying? Because I can see I'm a firm believer that once you get to a certain point in life, like status and whatnot, your life is not your own anymore.
Yeah, totally see what you're saying, but I think the depth of the issue though is whether or not they should be held accountable for putting out inaccurate information, regardless of who it's about. Like, so even if they did it on somebody lives here on 5th Street, like how accountable should we be holding our news outlets?
And I think Giles would agree with this. When we were online last week, when we went off, what's the first thing I said? I said TMZ, unfortunately or fortunately, has become in some ways more of a reputable news outlet than other places. Because they're getting stories first, and people don't realize they have millions of dollars coming in, and they are reporting things. I don't even want to call it real time anymore. I think that's too slow. It's all, seriously. They're reporting stuff. If it happened 30 seconds ago, they might be reporting it 10 seconds earlier.
It wouldn't be a market for it if we weren't asking for it.
It's such an interesting dynamic now, because I don't go to CNN to see if this is true. I went to TMZ.
You're right.
I went to TMZ.
You're right.
I went to TMZ because I'm trying to remember in this I call it the Kardashian age, when they've been wrong.
So there's so many, one of the things.
There's so many different directions.
Yeah, one of the things that it opens up for me is just to say, here's a basic thing about the rise of nonprofit news in as your local source for sort of what you used to think of the daily newspaper covered. I think it was like $350 million a year revenue for nonprofit newspapers last year in the U.S. like 480 this year. So like almost a quarter of growth in localities. The reason is because a lot of localities just straight up losing their newspapers because of vertical integration in the industry, which means you have no independent reporting, even of stuff that's on the public record that is your taxpayer money. So that's serious, right? The second piece, though, is what you guys are kind of referring to, which is that like for-profit media now really moves on impressions, because it's how you sell advertising. Some of it is some of it is more nuanced in terms of market share and brand and other types of transactions. But a lot of revenue is when you see the spike, get on top of it and drive it as long as you can, as fast as you can, with as many cuts as you can.
Because the eyes are the product. Well, the eyes.
Yeah, because it's in your self-interest. So like if you're TMZ and the Kobe things happens, you should stop doing anything else and get 300 cuts out today, all fragmented. So you're basically selling people fragmented information, sometimes before it's ready, and to the exclusion of other important things that are happening, because you get paid to do that. And so if you're then thinking, and you can see a little bit of that in like what frankly Charlottesville City Council news looks like. It's almost always sort of day-to-day, he said, she said, argument-based controversy. And then there's like no decision or no tax value or no change in the process. I mean, do you care? The answer is you do care because it's fun to read. And the more people write about it, the more fun it is to read, and that drives impressions. So it's good for the local newspaper. But it's not good for us. What we're trying to do is say, are the solutions right for the public housing reinvestment plan? Do you think so? But how do we compete in a way that we have market share, voice, audience buy-in, trust, so that the people kind of pointing and shooting the reporters at the processes represent all of us?
Exactly.
And that's, I mean, I think that when we started out, we broke down the Al Jazeera thing. You can see how the two questions
they're
connect.
very
You're
similar.
following this
Absolutely.
track. I mean, on the with Razor, with respect, you also brought, Charles, you guys were talking about the moral component. And like, I grew up the child of journalists in the District of Columbia. They moved there in the 60s. Lived in Capitol Hill right after the riots and worked for the Washington Post and the Washington Star. So like, I grew up in this kind of like the child of journalists in the best moment of American journalism, like 70s and 80s. Most money, most staff, most importance, most credibility, most ideology. And so at the time, there was this real sense that they had like a moral code, even in the White House press corps, which my mom was in during the Carter administration, in part because there was like 12 people in the room and you knew them all. So if somebody was faking on the information, you could like pull them aside and be like, whatever. Now you go to look at the White House press room, it's like 160 people from all over the world with completely different perspectives about everything, right? And then you throw in the fact that national media was essentially white media then, right? Like, that was a problem. So you're going to, and then how do you get across, once you open up the can of worms of, do we trust that your even sense of what information is correct? That's the world we're all living in right now. Right. So we have to be creative, aggressive, but also relational about getting around this bend and just saying at the very basic level, you got a lot of public processes that are public record in the public interest with your public dollars. Like, so it's your skin in the game. And that's what's controlling your buses, your schools, your electricity bill, your zoning, your ability to resell your house value, all that stuff, right? Does that matter to you? Your criminal justice system, your attorney, it matters to you, right? And there's like, so can you then solve like the power of the system behind the system with our three little reporters helping you? No. But can you follow where the pea is moving under the shells for the main things that we're talking about in your backyard? Yeah. I mean, if they know what to go find out for you, Like, I can't get access to capital, and I'm a small business person. Why is that?
Right.
Why can I get a $60,000 Sallie Mae loan but can't get $5,000 to start a business?
Yeah.
Somebody need to.
I agree.
Yeah.
Excellent conversation.
Yeah,
Excellent.
so IMHO Talk Show. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to close out the hour with this business segment, Cville Tomorrow. There's so much show ahead. Hit us during the break, 434-422-9101. IMHO Talk Show. That was another big story from last year.
Yeah, I was going to say so many RIPs, man. So many, man.
And his death represents, so much, so significant to the culture because of, where hip hop is right now, the content of it, and, gone too soon. It's happening too often. So
Triple X, Juice, all of them, man.
That's right, man.
Rest in peace, man.
So we are closing out this top business hour of the show, and stay tuned. You don't want to miss it on this Black History Month first show 2020. We have Giles Morris of Cville Tomorrow giving us great insight, great brother, great partnership to have with IMHO in the community. And so, Giles, I want to just close out the last couple of minutes to hand it over to you, just to make sure people realize the significance, and when in the future when they see, some of the outreach that Cville Tomorrow is doing through us and in the community, want to make sure they get the gist of this, why they should pay attention. Because the one thing that stands out to me is that people need to remember, Ron, when we talk about Birth of a Nation, I'm talking about the original Birth of a Nation, not the remade movie that that we liked.
You're talking about the first.
I'm talking about the KKK.
The
KKK Birth of a Nation. That was media. That was intent to paint a picture of black men and as savages, and it worked. They showed it at the White House in, what was it, 1920? Was that right?
Yeah. Early 1920s.
Yeah, so,
President said it was a historical masterpiece.
Right. So when you put that, like in your, in your brain's gray matter, then you realize why it's so important to be well represented. So, Giles, I'll give the last words to you.
Oh man, that's so deep. First of all, I appreciate you guys having me here on the show, and particularly in the first show, Black History Month, that we're talking about media in a very real way. Let me just say, for a minute, like I often contextualize myself, or on my resume, I say fourth generation journalist on my father's side, which I am. Those news businesses were in Memphis and North Alabama that my great-grandfather, grandfather, and father worked through and grew up in. So the role of white newspapers in the segregated South during Jim Crow, during integration, during all of the things that have created the world that we're in, was a toxic one. And yet the people were held up as being bastions of the First Amendment, of free speech, of the truth, arbiters of the truth. We have work to do. We know this. And we're trying at Charlottesville Tomorrow to say, look, if we're going to be a public service newsroom for the whole community, we've got to be really intentional about this. But we also are asking, come be involved, right? I get it. It's a white organization. It used to be really look and feel that way. It's nerdy. It's not where the issues that hit me most and hardest really are. Okay, respect, I hear you, but also we raise all this money from the community to run a public service newsroom responsible to you to make the issues facing your government, your systems, transparent and accountable to you. Help us do that, and we'll keep coming back on the show, work with you guys. I mean, you have such good perspective and questions and understand the media so well. Help us, teach us, and then in the meantime, we'll get better at following the ball and making the issues relevant and meeting you where you interests are and being real and not pulling punches and not hiding the truth. That's our plea, and thank you again for having me on the show today, and I look forward to being back.
Yeah, great conversation. Hopefully the listeners talked about everything from Birth of a Nation to NPR to Al Jazeera to communications to digital divide. I mean, it's just so many different things, so many jewels that were dropped, so we appreciate them again.
That's right. Thank you, Giles. Y'all stay tuned. IMHO, so much more show to go. 434-422-9101, IMHO Talk Show online.